Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is changing one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's episode is going to ask, is employment dead? It's a provocative title of a new book, and it's a bold invitation to reimagine what comes next. My guest today is Deborah Perry Piscione, co-founder of the Work3 Institute, a Silicon Valley serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and a thought leader on innovation and the future of work. She co-authored this book alongside Josh Dreen, where she argues it's time to move beyond job titles and office walls, and I wholeheartedly agree. So, if you've ever asked yourself what comes next, this is the conversation you don't want to miss. Deborah, welcome to the future of less work.
Thank you so much, Nirit. I appreciate you having me on. It's certainly a timely topic.
It is. And, I was actually worried a little bit at the beginning when I called this podcast The Future of Less Work, because it has that vibe that, puts a dystopian version on the future, as does Employment is Dead. But I didn't think about it this way. Actually, I thought about it in the context of how do we move towards a better, more humane, more fair future of work if we could only figure out how to design it. So why is employment dead?
Well, a large part of it is obviously what's going on in the landscape and the very rapid development around artificial intelligence. Josh and I felt we'd have a 5-year run with this book. I'm lucky if we end up having 5 months because the world is moving so much faster. And so we really thought we were going to be the only people out there talking about this. And you have Reid Hoffman, who's the former founder of LinkedIn, who's now launched Manus AI, and you look at the platform and you go, wow, not just is employment going to be dead, but also, entrepreneurship. If Manus AI can pretty much code and do the research and find market fit for you, what is the future landscape around employment, entrepreneurship, and then, of course, the investment futures as well. The entire landscape is going to change.
Yeah.
And
So landscape of work and the components that make up work as we know it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean there's no work for us to do in new ways that we form around creating value.
Right. Well, that's the operative word, value, right? Because we've identified ourselves with work for so long. What happens when that work goes away? I was talking about this barbell economy where we're going to see certainly an uptick in AI engineers and then the trades. I used to say you would be an AI engineer or plumber. Now I'm saying you've got to be both because, the reality is for the time being, we're going to see very much an uptick in physical jobs. And these are things that Peter Thiel has been talking about for so long, the value of the college education. Well, particularly in the era of AI, it continues to erode. For now, we still need physical electricians and people to, pick for now, pick foods and vegetables but it is, we're going to have humanoids right behind us.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got this process going here, and I had this conversation with Anish Raman from LinkedIn a while ago, right? So we say, okay, we used to work with our hands, and then the technology or machines came in and kind of replaced us, and then we worked with our minds, which we call knowledge worker, and now we've got technology coming in to replace us. And like you said, there's more technology that will replace the things we're still doing with our hands and with our bodies, and that thought process brings us to nobody needs us anymore, right? What's our job, or what's our value proposition?
Right, absolutely. And I think, while it will happen on a larger commercialized scale, I always said we're going to start to come back full circle, not necessarily to Neanderthal days, but maybe the pre-industrial revolution, where we may grow our own food and will become much more community focused. I'm seeing the rise in family run businesses because even large corporations in the very near term will scale back potentially to 50 to 200 people. We are going to see initially, the company of one, the next multi-billion-dollar company in the company of one. So, recently we heard from the Anthropic co-founder saying that white collar entry level jobs are going to be cut in half in the next year to 5 years. So, what does that mean for all the young people coming out of school as well? So, it's really a much more profound transformation than anything we've ever seen.
So let's actually talk about some of the concepts that you talk about, right? Because employment and the job and the profession as we know it, right? The way we've structured work um, is an ownership model. So I study a profession. By the end of my 20s, I can call myself something, right? Then I come work for you and you own my time and you pay me my salary and I'll retire in about 30 some years. That I completely agree with you. That model is dismantling because we're seeing it starting with, by the
Yeah.
way, the idea of me having a profession, right, and a job, and then the employment. But you do have some really interesting ideas about how the value system can reconnect in new ways because we still
Yeah,
need to trade, right? I still know some things that you don't, and vice versa.
yeah, although that is quickly going away too when AI can do the thinking for you on the things that I don't know. And so, originally, our book sold in December of 2022 as a metaverse book and didn't come out until the end of January 2025. And so, obviously the world has completely shifted, but originally the intent was to focus a little bit on AI and what's going on, but then also talking about some of the other avenues through Web3 and the blockchain. Certainly cryptocurrency becoming just more of a global currency without borders as well. And then being able to do blockchain project based work where DAOs are created, that's decentralized autonomous organizations, where you get involved in the direction of a company, you're making decisions together, there's much more democratization, and you're starting to tap into the projects that you're passionate about anywhere around the world. And there's some really interesting companies out of Switzerland in particular that is focused on blockchain work, project based work, and certainly Upwork. um, so, for the foreseeable future, I think we'll see more of that and then the hyper gig economy. I sit here in Silicon Valley and we certainly have had Waymo driving around in San Francisco, but I actually encountered my first driverless car recently in my neighborhood. And before I would say, oh, well, you can drive for Uber. And so this is all moving a lot more rapidly than we anticipated. So we're having to think about things differently just beyond work. What's government's responsibility? Because we're going to need an entirely new economic model in this process. If money goes away as well in concert, what does this all look like? Are we going to barter? Are we going to trade? What are we going to do?
Yeah, I think maybe so let's pull back from all the way there, right? But even this idea that you called it Upwork, right? So the whole idea of people bringing value and we'll keep money in the loop for a second, but basically finding each other and trading that value and creating groups or projects or entities around work in a different way than that corporation, because there's the scenario of, like, I call it the $1 billion company with no people, right, or the one person $1 billion company. There's also an interesting version of the unicorn individual, which would be that one person that has an idea that can actually have all the tools at their disposal to create the $1 billion value without having to become a company, work for a company. There's that too. Maybe we can, if the technology takes away some of the grunt work, maybe we can do the things we never got around to doing, and maybe we're passionate about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, entrepreneurship has got to be a part of the conversation, whether you consider yourself entrepreneurial minded or not. So it is really the person who comes up with the idea. The problem is that, when you have platforms like Manus AI out there, other individuals can come up with that same idea once the exposure's there. So I think you're going to see the entrepreneurial cycle a lot shorter than we typically have seen. And so there's a lot of complexity on where we're heading. And then we haven't talked about agentic AI and certainly artificial generative AI, that this is, or general AI, is all happening so much faster than we thought. Where, robots are in the mix and they can think for themselves. And we have to kind of wake up to this reality, how fast the world is eroding.
Yeah, so I'm gonna push back just a little bit.
Feel
I
free.
wonder whether we're underestimating the nuances of the human element within work that we've never had to look at, right? Because we focused on what we called the hard skills. But if everybody, and you said it, right? If everybody used the same tools, it's almost like there's either only one answer to every question, but we know that that's not true. And so the question is, what makes you you? And so when you go in and you ask a question or try to create something, right? And I go in and try to create something, we're going to end up with something slightly different because of who we are, what we value, what we're pushing for. Even at the very basic, even writing, right? I mean, the tools write, but they don't exactly write the same for you and for me because ultimately we're iterating with them. And so I wonder whether we completely take the human out of the loop if we're not just basically saying there's more than one answer, and you bring humans back in the loop and they'll create versions, and we'll suddenly start understanding what we're about. That's more than just the hard skills.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're going to get a different response if you take a prompt and you plug it into ChatGPT versus Anthropic versus Gemini. You're going to get different responses. So I think the point there is, as emotional intelligence continues to evolve, they will have different emotional components of AI. There is certainly an interim period where the human in all this matters. Look, there's nothing more that I want to be able to talk about than the human at work. It's just where I sit. I'm seeing this evolution happen, a lot faster. And so we've got to wake up to the reality of, what does the world look like for those of us that are adopting this a lot faster. And I think the big, question is going to be around digital fluency, right? And those who can keep up are going to kind of be in a winner takes all scenario. And those who fall further and further behind or are not prepared for this new reality will continue. You can look at the different parts around the world and different parts around the country. Will still have farming with people
Yeah.
picking crops until the AI robotic element of farming takes over. So, there'll certainly be a lag period. It's just, I'm, very much in tune where this world is heading now.
So what you talk about the new social contract. What do you think we need to be thinking about in terms of the social contract?
So that's such a great question. I mean, government's going to have to play a much larger role. We can't really call this unemployment anymore. This was, it, we, months ago we were talking about upskilling, but now I'm saying upskilling, reskilling to what? Where are we going to take a marketing executive where AI can completely take over, not over that individual's job, but all jobs throughout the organization? What are we upskilling them to do or reskilling them to do? And so we're going to have to get a lot more creative. If the family, if we value family, maybe government starts to subsidize for things that, like child raising or taking care of parents. That's really what the social contract is about the future. It does become much more community oriented. I think our capitalist society, um, it is not going to work. It'll work for a few, for sure. in this environment, but it really is going to be a handful of leaders in this AI space.
Yeah, I think, well, if you look at the history, right, we've gotten, as technology, even, the technology of a century ago, we gotten more time off, more paid time off, more social security kind of benefits over the years. Education, once upon a time, wasn't free for all, right? It wasn't something you got. So this idea that the governments will give you a broader basic set of infrastructure for your life that might include, I don't know, food, clothing, housing. It sounds odd to us right now, but if you go back 100 years, so did education for everyone, free education, right? So this idea isn't, it makes sense, right? I mean, technology comes in, prices drop, you can build in more into the social system, but people still need something to do, and they're still
Yeah.
innovative and, creative and passionate. I'm not sure just, sending us back to take care of our families is where we want to go.
Well, it's one component of the social contract. I think what I'm trying to explore now is, what does that new economic model look like? And it may be a hybrid of a lot of things. I just spoke recently in Mexico City, and I think Mexico has always gotten it right with the family run business. I think we're going to come back to our families, back to our communities, and we may have community run governments, for setting up food and social structure and the things that we've really been complaining about for so long. That we don't have time, or you have to have two working parents because of the affordability factor as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a very interesting time, and that's how we're going to use our minds, is figuring out what that looks like,
Yeah, no. Now,
and then
I
adapting
feel
to
now
it.
we've circled to, now I think we're back to something that I was maybe trying to talk about, that we we might not work on some of the things that we do today, like you said, the marketing manager working for a company, but there's so much that we don't get around to, that we've been complaining about, how we live in stress and fatigue, and outsourcing important things like taking care of our children and our, elder parents, that we might maybe become entrepreneur and innovative and creative about a lot of things that we never got around to doing. Wouldn't that be
Yeah,
great?
yeah, 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 that's the extraordinary part about this, if we do adopt these tools. And I certainly understand why lots of companies don't want the adoption, because at the end of the day, there's going to be massive job loss. So governments really need to play a much more proactive role in what this is going to look like. In the US, if President Trump is asking for more children, paying $8,000 for babies to be born, we have to take it to the next step. Okay, who's going to care for those children? How do we make life affordable? How do we address the things that we've all just been sucked into, like premium pricing? And so, a lot of questions need to be raised, a lot of creativity has to come into play. And then getting people on board is going to be just another component of, just the massive kind of rethinking or reimagining what work and life is going to look like.
So if you were talking to a younger generation, a child, or an important figure in your family that is starting out these days, what would you have them do?
Well, I do have that situation, and the first thing is, I have twin boys who are 20, and both absolutely set up to and perform to be at top performing schools, Ivy League schools, and one is not going to college, and making his own content and works as an actor, and had started a streetwear company during COVID. And the other one did go to a four-year school, and he is now taking a leave of absence. And quite frankly, I hope he drops out, because I don't understand the value of a $90,000 degree a year education when AI is just going to take over the world of finance, which is his major. And so it is much more around the creator economy in the interim, a hyper gig economy, and recognizing that we absolutely not only need to address what's going on in higher ed, but really getting back to K through 12 education. I'm so thrilled to see a lot of the trades coming back in our public high schools and public middle schools. I certainly got to take woodworking and plastics and other things. We have to go where the shortages are right now on the physical labor. And simultaneously, you can get a certificate through Harvard or Google and AI and probably get employed, a couple hours a week doing AI engineering while you're acting as an electrician.
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting how careers are completely transforming. And, I do commend you on your reaction, because I remember when my son, it came in and he wanted to drop out of his MBA. Right. And so, and I've been talking about the future of work for a long time, and I knew that was the right decision. And when he said to me is, schools preventing me from learning, right? Because he wanted to go focus on learning what he
Yes.
needed and not necessarily what they were teaching him. But it's still really interesting to think about what it means, and how do we build education? And you talked about schools, but all the way up, how do we build lifelong learning, right? What kind of tools do we have to keep ourselves relevant?
Yeah. And how we learn how to build portfolio careers, because portfolio careers is not just about having bits and pieces, but having multiple revenue streams that kind of play off each other.
Yeah, and
So I'm very,
building one on top of the other, because otherwise it's just, completely agree. I actually call those the careers these days moving from ladders to rock climbing walls, because you decide where you're going to put your foot, and sometimes it's a step up, but sometimes it's a step sideways and down, just because
yeah.
you're changing direction, but you're still building on whatever got you here, right?
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's as simple as right now I'm going to drive for Uber, but I'm also going to offer my every passenger I take in the gluten-free cookies that I make, that were a recipe I created, and turning that into a business.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how you get those revenue streams to play off one another.
Okay, awesome. So, I always wrap up with this question, right? What we're really good historically at having answers. And I actually wanted to ask you for the question you think we should all be asking ourselves these days about the future of work.
Yeah, so I don't know that we can divorce the future of work from the future of life. So anytime people addresses that, for me, the biggest question on my mind is, what is the economic model going to look like in the future? If we don't have steady jobs or revenue streams, this is why I think Bitcoin expansion is going to be very interesting as well. So what is the proactive role that government has to take in these economic models? Communities have to take into place, because they're going to look different, around the world and individual communities. And what are our responsibility in, not just the social safety net, but the care of the planet overall. And I think they're all tied together.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Wow. This has been fascinating. Thank you, Deborah, for joining me today. For more about Deborah and her work, check out the links in the podcast description. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to like and follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to. They don't work because you measure them on it or you tell them to. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're achieving their own purpose in life. Till next time.